Welcome back to the secret world of human trafficking. I'm your host, David J. Story. I'm also the author of the Omega book series. Today we have a special guest, a former CIA operative and pararescuer. He's been nicknamed the real Jack Ryan. I want to welcome Nick McKinley to our show today. Nick, won't you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Well, thanks for having me, David. Again, Nick McKinley. I'm the founder and CEO of DeliverFund. We are a technical-focused counter-human trafficking nonprofit. So we provide data to over 9,000 law enforcement officers across the United States. So if you see a counter-human trafficking sting or something like that in the news, extremely high probability that the law enforcement officers involved in that were using our data.
Great. That sounds wonderful. So that's a good service to provide. And tell us about your experience with
As my human trafficking experience or experience fighting human trafficking?
yeah, all of that. Our audience wants to know everything. Tell us everything.
Okay. So originally from Montana and joined the military, went straight into special operations at a young age, and then got recruited to a specialized unit within the Central Intelligence Agency, and ended up leaving that unit in order to build DeliverFund as a counter-human trafficking nonprofit. So where we really focus is on fighting trafficking at the scale of the problem. A lot of people see my background and they think, oh, we must be kicking doors and things like that. And we don't do that. In fact, pretty much anybody who has a badge and a gun and or doesn't have a badge and a gun and is claiming they're doing that kind of work is committing felonies, and we try to avoid those. So for the human trafficking fight, really what I realized was that it was very similar to the war on terror. And at the end of the day, we really like to watch movies about the action guys, kicking doors, but nobody really wants to watch the movie about trying to figure out what door to kick. And that's actually the most important part of the work. So when I left the CIA, when I was very much on that operational action end of the Central Intelligence Agency, I realized that what law enforcement really needed was intelligence to tell them what door to go kick, which victims, where the victims are, so they can rescue them, but also more importantly, going directly after the trafficker, because putting a trafficker behind bars is the ultimate form of prevention. You cannot have a trafficking victim if you do not have a trafficker. So that's where we focus all of our time and attention.
Great.
So we don't go on missions. We provide the data so law enforcement officers can go on missions. Right. So again, we provide data to over 9,000 law enforcement officers across the United States. There's no way us, a small little organization with just over a dozen employees, obviously would be going on those missions. And as I said before, if you don't have a badge and a gun, you're committing a felony. Why are you there? Are you there just because you're trying to play action guy, or are you there because you're actually useful in, say, the hotel room? The reality is the intelligence work that is the only way that we get to the bottom of this problem at scale. So I know as much about kicking doors as anybody on the planet. I did 30 combat deployments, many of them to Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Pakistan. That is not scalable. And when it comes to the trafficking issue, we have a scale problem. And so we need to take that a scalable approach to fighting it if we're truly serious about getting to the bottom of the. So we don't do operations.
I understand.
We facilitate law enforcement's operations by providing them with intelligence on who the human trafficker is. So traditionally, what a lot of law enforcement officers would do is they would just go out on a traditional sting operation, if you will. They would try to, just kind of throw a bunch of fake advertisements out on the web and see who they could reel in. Well, that's not the way that we fight terrorism. We don't just try to see, who's inside of a building. When we go after somebody or when we're trying to collect intelligence on somebody, we know exactly who the person is, what it is that motivates them. We kind of know everything about them. So we provide the intelligence on who the human trafficker is, so that when law enforcement goes out, they can actually essentially wrap that person up in an operation and hold them accountable. And then more importantly, they can rescue their victims.
You mentioned that your child is safer walking home than scrolling.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the data supports very well that abductions are extremely rare in trafficking. I hear all these myths around, people think that trafficking is the white van with free candy painted on the side of it that's going through a neighborhood and is going to abduct a child. The data shows that a child has roughly the same chance of being struck by lightning as they do as being abducted by a stranger in the modern age. It's actually so traffickers are contacting these children primarily on the internet. It's on the internet where where essentially the predator finds their prey, manipulates that prey, and then oftentimes it's the child actually participating in the trafficking, in the recruitment phase of trafficking. So the danger is way more online than it is in the physical world. I mean, we're talking economies of scale more in the in the cyberspace than it is in the physical world.
What are some of the tactics that some of these predators use to entice the children online?
The primary tactic that they're going to use is going to be some form of filling a need that child has demonstrated that they have. So it could be lack of a father figure. It could be just, kind of standard teenage rebellion. It could be any number of things. But what the trafficker is looking to do is not necessarily do one specific thing. They're looking to figure out what that child's vulnerability is and then exploit that vulnerability for their own gain.
What does I know there's a growing need for porn out there. How does that play into the human trafficking?
So pornography and human trafficking have and when I say pornography, we'll go ahead and throw the strip clubs in with those as well.
You're good.
Uh, there's a very, very significant overlap between the two. We have plenty of intelligence of human traffickers, say, walking out of strip clubs with trash bags full of dollar bills, saying that putting their victim in a strip club was the best investment they ever made in their business. Plenty of cases where human traffickers have forced their victims to participate in pornography or pornographic films in order to make money off of them. And so there is a significant overlap between pornography and human trafficking. And I know a lot of pornography is also obviously extremely rampant within America, specifically within our population of males. And I get a lot of pushback from men who say, "Oh, it's just one, and there's a trafficking that slips through the cracks in pornography, but there's not a lot of trafficking in pornography, and the data just doesn't support that." Every single peer-reviewed study that's ever been done on this issue shows that there's significant overlap between the trafficking industry and the pornography industry.
Wow. I didn't realize that. Where do a lot of the traffickers get their money? I heard that trafficking is starting to outpace drug trafficking.
That's actually a myth that is not true. So the myth is that a trafficker, a human trafficker can make more money off of a person than they can off of narcotics, because you can only use narcotics once, and you can use the trafficking victim repeatedly. There's
Mhm.
no peer reviewed research that actually shows that. And what we find in our data, and we have more counter human trafficking data and commercial sex data than anybody on the planet. We've been doing this for 11 years now. We have our own supercomputing clusters. I mean, we are. From a technical perspective, we have probably more technical capability in the human trafficking fight than anybody, because that's our focus, right? That's what it is that we do. Um, so what we find is that yes, trafficking victims can be used repeatedly, but on a per use basis, the profit margins are significantly higher on narcotics. Right. So as an example, you can leave a shipping container full of narcotics in the port of San Diego, leave it there for a year, and it's probably more valuable a year later. You can't
Hmm.
leave a bunch of people in a shipping container,
No.
right? They're going to die.
Right.
And people require overhead. Uh, fentanyl doesn't require overhead. You press the pills and you distribute the pills. It's very simple. Humans require overhead. They require food, water, sleep, right? I mean, they require maintenance. And so that's why the human trafficking outpacing narcotics trafficking is a myth. The second reason why is because there's just a significantly larger market for narcotics than there is for human trafficking. The total addressable market for narcotics is economies of scale larger than it is for human trafficking. And then you also have this myth that's going around that human trafficking is becoming the essentially largest illicit commodity market in the world. That's also completely untrue. Financial fraud and weapons proliferation are significantly larger markets than and narcotics trafficking. They're all significantly larger markets than human trafficking. In fact, we think that's one of the reasons why trafficking doesn't get the the resourcing required to fight it at the government level, is because it tends to happen in the shadows to less people. And most of
Uh,
the people that it happens to, or many of the people that it happens to, tend to be socioeconomically disadvantaged. And a lot of it's driven by poverty, where the customers tend to be individuals in powerful positions.
Great. Can you share a story from your work that illustrated the scale and urgency of this crisis?
Yeah, there's a recent story that one of our intelligence analysts was working with a law enforcement task force in Texas, and providing intelligence for a human trafficking operation that they were conducting, and they found that there was a young girl being trafficked, and she was being trafficked by a single mom who lived in an upper middle class neighborhood, no different than probably most of the people listening to this podcast. And that single mom had her own kids. The way that she was paying for this middle class lifestyle was through trafficking of another person's child. Simultaneously, during that same operation, we had this man show up as a customer, because we train law enforcement how to rescue victims and arrest traffickers and arrest customers all within the same type of operation, and providing intelligence on all of them. So the customer shows up, they arrest the customer, and the customer starts crying because his daughter's recital dress was in the back of his car. And he was sad that his daughter wasn't going to get her dress for her piano recital. Not sad that he got caught trying to solicit sex from a minor. Sad
Yeah.
that he got caught before he could get his daughter's recital dress to her. So that, I think, just kind of goes to show the scale of this problem. These were, businessmen. We've had doctors, airline pilots, law enforcement officers, pastors, coaches, teachers. I mean, you name it, show up either as customers or as traffickers in these operations. And so again, we have this scale problem that was primarily created by technology. And so it's technology that created the modern trafficking problem in the United States. Now, that's different if we talk about the developing world. Trafficking that happens in the developing world is a very different business model than trafficking that happens in the developed world. And we solely focus on the United States.
This system that you created, the AI and data science, explain how that works as far as gathering information and
So we obviously the actual way it works is a trade secret, so we won't get into
yeah,
that. Plus, most of your
understand.
audience isn't going to know what half the words mean. But a way to think of it is traffickers have to advertise online, and this is not on the dark web or the deep web. There's actually not much trafficking that happens in the dark web or the deep web. It's primarily on the front-facing internet. You could find it using nothing but your phone and Google in the next 5 minutes, wherever you are in the world, or if you're in a developed country, if you started looking for it. And so traffickers have to advertise on the front facing internet. So we harvest those advertisements at a massive scale. We put them through a series of AIs and machine learning models that actually help us to take all of that information and make sense of it so that the law enforcement officer in, say, you know, North Texas can find the very specific signal that they're looking for. So while we harvest massive amounts of data, where we really specialize is in providing the law enforcement officer in the geographic location he's in with the information he needs in a time frame that's relevant to his operation or her operation.
Well, how did your experience and your special operations shape the approach you took building this system?
One of the things that I learned when I was primarily at the CIA, a little bit within the pararescue teams, but primarily at the CIA, was that the technical work that we were doing in my unit, we did a lot of operational facilitation. So, which is a way of saying that you had case officers and people who were responsible for running assets and running operations, but we were the ones who actually went out and did the fun stuff. I actually went out and did the operations, and a lot of what we were doing was electronic in nature. And when you are doing those types of operations, you have to have somebody who has the I guess intellectual interest in learning the electronics, and so I did, and that got me some very unique experiences for somebody with my background. And I just realized that that same methodology and the technologies that we're using in the counterterrorism fight could be applied to the human trafficking problem in a counter human trafficking methodology. Because there's a difference between, and one of the things that I think many people don't understand is the difference between anti trafficking and counter trafficking. Those are two very different things and very different methodologies. Anti trafficking is the prevention of trafficking. Counter trafficking is countering the act of trafficking, right? So one is trying to keep it from happening, the other is going after it once it does happen. So one tries to prevent the problem, the other tries to solve the problem.
Going back to the internet, what are some of the applications that these traffickers are using to get their hands on the children in the home?
Any application that has two-way communication with kids on it. It's that simple. So it's Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Roblox, Minecraft, Discord, TikTok. I mean, we could go on, but any application, and I do mean any, Xbox, PlayStation, where you have two-way communication and you have a audience that has a lot of children on it, you're going to have these predators showing up to try to manipulate that.
What do parents need to look out for?
Very first thing parents need to realize is what I just said, that every single application that has two-way communication that they allow their children to be on, that gives predators access to their children. I mean, that is just a statement of fact. The second thing they need to watch out for is they really need to teach their children that anybody who comes along and says they're going to solve all your problems and seems too good to be true, that's exactly what it is. It's too good to be true. And that person is trying to manipulate you, probably for their own benefit, or in the case of trafficking, for their own profit. And then the third thing would be obviously to just be very involved with the child. There's parents out there who will say, well, my kid's friends have social media, and so I don't want my kid to feel left out. And to which I just say, okay, well, there's parents out there who allow their kids to play with loaded guns. Does that mean that you're just going to let your kid play with loaded guns? Right? Because some other parent does it, like, sack up and get some courage and learn to say no. And where we really have a problem is with parents who are allowing kids to, have screens as the babysitter. And it's it's a hill I'll die on. You know, Good parents don't let their children do things like play Roblox. Full stop. Like I will argue that with peer-reviewed research. I will argue that based on what's actually happening, not based on an Instagram post that somebody saw. And so if you give your children unsupervised access to the internet, you are giving predators unsupervised access to your children.
It doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it takes, from my understanding, sometimes weeks or months for a predator to groom that child.
That's right. It can take weeks to months. There are some platforms that we're aware of where from the time the child enters the platform to the time they see something that is pornographic and age inappropriate is 15 seconds. So on one hand, you have children being exposed to things which is really just desensitizing them to things that they shouldn't be desensitized to within 15 seconds. And then on the other hand, you have the predators will take days, weeks, or months to manipulate and groom that child for their own benefit.
You've testified before Congress before.
Yes.
Uh, Tell us, what are some of the misconceptions that's out there, and what does Congress, what's the misconception Congress has?
So the biggest misconception is that this is a law enforcement first fight. It's not. Part of my graduate work was what's called 10 points of disruption, or drafting and crafting what are the 10 points or the 10 opportunities to disrupt the human trafficking market. If anybody's interested, they can go to 10points.deliverfund.ai, and they can actually see, they can learn more about that. But within the human trafficking market, there are 10 opportunities to disrupt the human trafficking business model. And you only have to disrupt one of those and the whole business model falls apart. Well, the law enforcement first approach to fighting trafficking means that you would have to spend an additional $3.67 billion a year and hire an additional 42,000 law enforcement officers. Where are you going to get, even if you could come up with the money, where are you going to get the talent to fill those positions? You're not. Law enforcement can't fill the positions they currently have. So oftentimes, people will go to Congress and say, well, what we need to fight trafficking is more law enforcement officers. The math and the data completely disagree with that. I built Markov chain models and statistical models to actually prove that is not the way, that is not our best use. Our best use is to actually regulate industry. So we need, to close the burner phone loophole. We need to make sure that social media sites actually know who are the children and who are not, and don't allow children to communicate with people that are strangers that they don't know. We need to make sure that there's proper regulation around what addictive behaviors and algorithms are social media companies are allowed to expose children to. There's so many different things that we can do to reduce the scale and the size of the trafficking market well beyond taking a law enforcement first approach. And then the second thing is just this idea that these are stranger danger abductions, that there's, traffickers are following, a mom through Target as she's doing her shopping. That is just not the way that trafficking works. The trafficker doesn't need to put in that kind of work when they can access children directly at large scale with almost no risk directly through the internet.
So, what drives you to do this? Do you have a family, or
I
I
mean,
mean,
yeah,
I've
I have a
got
family, but also someone's got to do it, and that's really what it comes down to is there's so many people who will talk about how much they don't, how sad what's going on in the trafficking space is, but someone actually has to go do the work and, create the platforms that build the systems and so if not me, then who?
exactly. Yeah, that's why I come up with this. I wrote a series of books on human trafficking, which is fictional, and I thought, well, there's something else I need to do. I mean, I'm new at this podcasting, and it's taken off better than I thought. We're in 24 different countries right now and over 200 cities, and it's growing. What I found out, there's not a lot of information out there on trafficking. Uh,
There really
Most,
isn't. And I think that's by design, right? YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, they all censor information around trafficking. Well,
mhm,
I've got questions as to why. This isn't something that is really talked about in the political space very much. The Epstein files have kind of brought that a little more to light, but you see lots of grandstanding about it. You see very little action. We have an ATF in our federal government, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, right? Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms are all legal. Yet we don't have an anti-trafficking, like we don't have a single dedicated anti-trafficking law enforcement division, right? So why do we have a federal law enforcement agency dedicated to the enforcing the laws around alcohol, tobacco, and firearms? But we have a single law enforcement agency that's dedicated to enforcing the laws around drug enforcement, but we don't have a single law enforcement agency dedicated to the fight against child trafficking. There's incredible men and women at Department of Homeland Security, at the DOJ, at the FBI, who are doing their best, but they're significantly under resourced as compared
mhm.
to those other agencies. So it's just something that there are our politicians don't really care about, because if they did really care about it, they would be putting forth funding and creating mechanisms to try to actually solve it.
Why don't you think they care about it?
Look who's in the Epstein files.
That's true.
It's that simple. I mean, do you think Matt Gaetz from Florida, who openly admitted to buying prostitutes, is going to see a human trafficking bill come through and be like, "Oh yeah, I want to support that"? You think Rodriguez from Texas is going to want to support that, or Swalwell from California is going to want to support that? I mean, look at the pushback from Nancy Mace's bill on the trying to hold members of Congress accountable for violent sexual acts that they've been under investigation for. And so I think really it's that simple. It's you've got a bunch of very powerful men who, quite frankly, are participating in this. We know that just if you look
Yeah,
at the Epstein files. Um, why are they? Why aren't we properly resourcing this fight? Why aren't we taking this fight seriously? It's because they're in on it. I think
I
it's that
agree.
simple.
I agree. Do you think anything will come about from the Epstein files, or you think it's
No,
just you don't
I
think so?
think I think the public is not going to let it go. Simultaneously, I think that I don't think anybody is going to be held accountable, and I don't really see anything coming from it. I mean, in Europe, they're doing a significantly better job holding their elected officials and their royal officials accountable for connections with Epstein than we are here in America.
That's sad.
It's very sad, and so that's why I think this is going to be an issue for the public for the next decade.
Hmm.
I don't think this is going to be but I'm not optimistic about anybody actually being held accountable.
Yeah, I don't think. anybody's going to go to jail for it. They might be embarrassed and may have to maybe resign, but that's probably about as far as it'll go. I don't
Hmm.
think anybody's going to go to jail here in the United States for it. Now, how do you go about protecting your children?
Well, my children are pretty young, so that's pretty easy for me at this point. But I mean, my children don't have access to anything that's connected to the internet. I mean, it was funny. They wanted to have the ability to play music in their rooms, and so my wife and I were like, okay, yeah, sure, we'll do that. You know how hard it is to find something these days that plays music that doesn't have Bluetooth or the ability to connect to the internet. It was difficult. So we
Yeah.
got them record players.
Wow.
And we thought we were smart in solving the problem until we realized that records are like $35 now. But that's the way that we do it. Our children do not have access to anything that is connected to the internet. If they are using something that's connected to the internet, it's on either one of their parents' devices, mine or my wife's, and we are right there, running it for them. And I'm not worried about them being technologically behind because learning how to use these devices, they're intuitive. So you don't need a computer science degree to run an iPad. I mean, babies can run an iPad. So they're actually going to be significantly cognitively ahead and academically ahead because they're learning how to think. They're learning how to read paper books. They're learning how to, kind of do the things in the old ways. They're writing with pencils. They're not typing. They're and and so that's the primary way, or the secondary way. The primary way is being involved parents. When we look across human trafficking cases that we've been involved in, the major majority of them uh, come come about primarily because of parents that are not overly involved in their children's lives, and parents who then have this concept that their children have a right to privacy. And that is just not the case. And so for their children, like, well, I want to protect my child's privacy. Okay, well, the protecting of your child's privacy meant that you weren't able to intervene when a predator stepped in,
Hmm.
right? And nobody's perfect, but I think, and predators can still get through, but it's less likely. There's a lot of other kind of lower hanging fruit for them to pick than going after a child who's doesn't have access to the internet and whose parents are extremely involved.
What do you know or your opinion on CSAM?
I mean, obviously, it's completely evil.
Of
It's
course, yeah.
different than trafficking. I think that's another kind of myth, is that CSAM is trafficking. It's not. It's not as defined by the law federally in most states, and it's a completely different business model, right? Trafficking is profit related. CSAM is gratification driven. So those are two different motives and two different methodologies. So you don't fight trafficking in the same way that you fight CSAM and vice versa. One of the things that I think is a disservice to the counter trafficking fight and the anti traffic, or just the trafficking movement at large, is that is trying to kind of combine the two under one umbrella, because the motivations of the criminals are different. And we learned this in the war on terror. And I think that's kind of another problem, is a lot of the people involved have like never really been to war, so they don't really understand how you fight a war, and we are very much at war with these traffickers. So
Exactly.
when you look at it through that lens, uh, in the war on terror, we realized that we can't go after a financier of terrorism in the same way we would go after a bomb maker. or we couldn't go after somebody who was, doing logistics for a terrorist network the same way that we would go after the actual operative who was planting the bomb. So those are just very different things, and they all required a different methodology in order to be successful against them. So the CSAM issue is obviously tragic and evil, but it's largely driven by pornography. And that's another thing people don't want to come face to face with, especially if people use pornography, is because pornography starts out, right. The pornography addiction cycle is pretty well documented, where it starts out as very, we'll just call it pornography light, and then it gets into harder and harder stuff and weirder stuff. And then the next thing you know, somebody who never thought they would be looking at naked children is looking at naked children. So that slippery slope, so to speak, gets very slippery very fast for people who engage in that industry. So, and that's another thing that people just don't want to, um, they just don't want to come to terms with.
Yeah, I know. I've had some people tell me that they just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. They'd much rather stick their head in the sand than they would actually come face to face with the fact that their actions are driving the human trafficking market.
And I had a lady, I've told this story several times. I was at a book signing and she asked about what my books were about. I told her, human trafficking, and she just freaked out. She just turned away. She said, I don't want to talk about it, and just walked off. And that's the problem, or one of the
Yes,
problems.
that's
Is
one of the major problems. Yes.
Yeah, and that's why I came up with this podcast, hoping to get the word out and maybe open some eyes.
Hmm.
And if it helps save one child or helps put one predator in jail, then I'm happy.
Okay.
Uh, but what about this group? I've been hearing a little bit about the 764. You
Yeah.
should.
So 764 is actually a satanic cult that is on social media. They're in gaming platforms, and they're trying to ultimately, their goal is to convince children to kill themselves on a live stream, right, on a live video. If they can't convince them to do that, then they convince them to harm themselves, harm other people, harm their pets, things like that. And ultimately, they want to get psychological control of these children. And then they will actually trade or sell these children between each other. So it's just one more example of the incredible dangers that are hiding on the internet, waiting for people's children. And I'll talk to parents, they'll be like, oh, well, not my child. Like, well, yeah, that every single parent who ever had a child who got involved in this really sick stuff said, not my child. So
Hmm.
you can put your head in the sand and be naive, and pour another glass of wine while you hand the iPad to your child. Like, that's on you. And so, it's what I find is that a lot of parents just don't want to have the fight with their children, and they are unwilling to stand up to their own kids. Or they'll say things like, oh, well, my child would tell me, or I monitor my child's communications. Is like, if you don't think your child is smart enough to figure out how to get around those monitoring platforms that you put on. I mean, I know a lot about it. I do this stuff professionally.
Hmm.
My home internet is a fortress, and I still do not give my children direct access to the internet where my eyes are not on the screen.
A lot of parents want to be the child's best friend, and the children don't
That,
need that. They need a parent.
that's not what we're called to do. Like, we are called to be parents.
Hmm. And part of that is protecting your child against predators outside your home and inside your home.
Hmm.
And when I was growing up, we didn't have the internet, so the predators were driving around in the white van and hanging out at the playgrounds, and and
Mm-hmm.
selling candy and ice cream, trying to lure kids with little puppies and all like that. That's no longer the case.
Yeah.
Now it's a lot easier for them
A lot
because,
easier. They have
yeah,
access to more kids.
yeah, access in more ways. I mean, they can be grooming uh, 10 or 15 children at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a network like 764 out there that's grooming children and, as you said, swapping them and having them to do all, you know, sacrificing themselves or committing murder or harming animals or whatever perverted idea they have that they want that child to do just for their entertainment.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I did a podcast on 764 when I first heard about it, and I was shocked. And and even to find out that the people who created it were teenagers.
Yeah. The teenagers themselves. And then also, the primary platform that they were operating on was a Discord and Roblox. And so then the question is, why are these platforms allowing this kind of behavior? And really it comes down to, they don't want to create friction for their users. They want to make it really easy for people to sign up. And we see this time and time again within these social media companies, because really, if you look at a company like Roblox, that's exactly what it is. It's a metaverse, right? It's not really a gaming platform. It's a platform where people can create worlds, and it's almost like a cross between gaming and metaverse and social media. And they are uninterested in doing anything that creates friction, because that will hurt their top line revenue.
Mhm.
And these companies have time and time again demonstrated that they are willing to put their revenue in front of the safety of children. And it's time they are held accountable for that, because that is a worldview and a philosophy that just we cannot stand by and allow to exist. Any company that is willing to put revenue in front of the safety of children and is willing to essentially price in the damage to children into their stock price needs to be held accountable for that, because that's a character flaw. That's a moral and ethical failing. And we as a society cannot just stand by and say, oh, that's too bad that they're doing that. And I think when we huddle up and we say, okay, well, we're just worried about protecting our kids, and we're just going to turn a blind eye to the things that these companies are doing that are harming our neighbors' children, well, that then also becomes a moral and ethical failing in us, right? To not speak out against injustice is a silent uh, acceptance of that injustice.
Right. I've actually had my books taken off of some platforms that I have them for sale because of the topic.
Oh, well, congratulations, because I think when you have when the enemy fights back, it means you're effective.
Mhm.
Right. My unit at the CIA, we were in a country, and the leader of a neighboring country said that we were an international terrorist organization. Said that the government agency I worked for was an international terrorist organization. We were like, oh, wow. Like, that's awesome. That's a
Mhm.
feather in our cap. That means that they know who we are, which
Yeah.
means we're being effective. So if the enemy isn't fighting back against you, you're not effective.
Right. That's how I took it. It was like, wow. I mean, I've even had criticism from people about my podcast and my books, but I shouldn't be doing it, or I shouldn't be talking about it. It's like, well, that's the problem. Not enough people are out there talking about it.
They're either confronted because they're pornography users. They are, right. 9% of American men have participated in the commercial sex industry. as a purchaser of either prostitution, or most of that is actually trafficking related, or their regular, attendance at strip clubs. And so they don't want to come face to face with the downstream consequences of where they're putting their money. And that's just like, one of the reasons why I feel like I'm called to do this is because there's a lot of women talking about human trafficking, right? Because that is primarily a issue that affects women and girls that is created by men. Like that, full stop. It's not that there aren't women who are traffickers. There's plenty of women who are traffickers. Many of them were trafficking victims who then became traffickers. There are some women who are just, sick and demonic and are traffickers. But by and large, this is the customer base that drives the market is men. And there's not enough men speaking out about it. And no man can call me a sissy. No man can say like, oh, that's just because you're not enough of a man, right? Because I'll say, nice golf clubs. You want to see my rifle, right? I mean, it's going to be a very different conversation than while they were slinging sales to used cars or whatever, right? I was in Afghanistan and Iraq, so that's part of the reason why I feel like God brought me through all those combat deployments, for the most part unscathed, is so that I could use that experience for the protection of others and to directly confront the men who are driving the market. And that is just something that the men who are driving the market have to contend with.
Yeah. What are, say, the youngest and the oldest that you've heard of or seen that's been trafficked?
From our law enforcement partners, based on our intel, the youngest has been under 1 year old. And the oldest is usually in their 30s. It doesn't, to my knowledge, we haven't had any cases where our intel's been involved where, on the commercial sex trafficking side anywhere, where people have been older than that. On the labor trafficking side, we've seen men and women in their 70s being trafficked, primarily in like marijuana grow operations and things like that.
Yeah, we've mainly talked about the sex, trafficking. I mean, there's more than just that and falls under human trafficking. Does your
Yep.
system address that also, or is it mainly focused on the sexual?
Our primary focus is on the commercial sex trafficking space, but we do work labor trafficking cases with certain law enforcement agencies across the United States. But the predominant form is commercial sex trafficking.
That seems to be I guess, the most harmful. Uh, what about organ removal, organ harvesting?
So we don't see a lot of that in America. That's primarily Central and South America and Eastern Europe. I think you see a little bit of that in Africa, not so much from the harvesting perspective, more from like ritualistic sacrifices and things like that. But the organ harvesting we've seen babies being literally grown for the purposes of harvesting their organs over in Eastern Europe. We used to do and participate in international operations with international law enforcement, but the reality is there's other organizations doing that, organizations like IJM that are doing a great job. And we don't need yet another organization working the trafficking issue overseas. We need to be working the trafficking issue in the United States of America, because dollar for dollar, we are the largest trafficking market in the world. So why are we going overseas trying to solve the problem when the major majority of the problem is right here at home?
Why do you think that is?
I think it's adventurism. I see it a lot. You have men who are primarily, they kind of come in two flavors. They come in younger men who served in the military, things like that, and kind of don't really know what else to do. And they kind of want to get back into that fight, so to speak. and they want to be seen as the hero in the story. Then you have older men, usually in their, call it late 40s to early 60s, who never really did anything dangerous in their life, and they're financially secure and they're retired. And so now they're like, oh, well, this is my last chance to try to be the hero in my own story. And so I think a lot of it is just, quite frankly, ego, because you don't see those men going overseas, with exceptions. Now there are exceptions, and I got nothing but respect for the people who are the exceptions. But you don't see them, leaving their comfortable life in Nashville, Tennessee, and then going over to Phnom Penh and deciding that they're going to stay there and live there and actually build a scalable system for fighting the trafficking over there. Instead, what do? They do these fake wannabe cop undercover operations where they feel like they're getting to be the spy, so to speak, and look at us. And the reality is they don't understand the corruption that happens over there. I mean, the Central Intelligence Agency doesn't pay bribes to foreign government officials because they want to. They do that because that's the way you get stuff done. So I have a really hard time believing that the most powerful intelligence agency the world has ever seen somehow has less capability than some nonprofit that decided they were going to do these like undercover operations overseas. And I think a lot of it is just adventurism from people who, quite frankly, haven't ever done anything consequential in their life. And now they're trying to. And they're going about it all the wrong way. And they are causing actually more damage and more harm than they are good. And they, just saying, okay, I'm financially secure and I've been, selling software my whole life. I don't care if you're doing jujitsu and CrossFit, you are not qualified to go do those kinds of operations.
No.
And you don't, quite frankly, have the stomach or the stones for it, because if you did, you would have signed up to do that instead of selling software your whole life. And so just saying, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to donate, and I'm going to get a bunch of my friends to donate. Instead, they tell themselves a story that they could have been a PJ or a Navy SEAL or a CIA operative or something like that. And the reality is they wouldn't have made it past the first day. And so, and that's okay. Like, God calls us all to do different things, right? I could never write fiction books, right? I just don't have the creative mind to be able to do that, right? The creative writing, like, it is a skill that God did not give me. And so I could never do that. And there's people who could never do what I do. And the engineers we have at DeliverFund are savants. They are so smart. I could never do what it is that they're doing. So we're all called to do different things. But I think part of the biggest reason why we see so much of this, like, I call it overseas adventurism. They're not really dedicated to the fight, because if they really were dedicated to the fight, they would submit to being involved in it full time. They just want to play the game, and it's what in the military we call the patch wearers, right? It's the people who didn't really go through selection, and they wanted, they didn't really want to do the mission. They just wanted to wear the patch. They just wanted to say they were, a special operator. They weren't really interested in actually doing the mission. And I think we see that a lot in the NGO space, where you get a lot of people who are, quite frankly, they're patch wearers. They're not so invested in the problem that they would go do it full time, but they want to essentially use that as their like little adventure vacation. And that is just wrong. It is. I'll debate that with anybody who wants to debate it. It's wrong. It's the wrong way to do things. You're either all in or you're all out. There is no in between, right? A house divided against itself cannot stand. And so you can't on one hand decide that You're going to go, fight trafficking in Thailand. Like, great example is I had this professional baseball player once who told me that God put him on this earth to protect other people. And I didn't want to be rude, but in my head, I was thinking, boy, are you failing at that, man? Like, you're swinging a bat and playing a game. Like, it's meaningless. If that was true, now you have a platform and you're using your platform to expand, the kingdom of God. Great. But don't sit here and say that you were put on this earth to protect other people when never in your entire adult life have you actually executed on that. And that's a great example of somebody who was really interested in wearing the patch and saying the words, but didn't want to actually do the work. Because if you talk to trafficking investigators, you talk to our analysts, they'll tell you, like, this is extremely difficult stuff. It's boring and simultaneously completely mentally debilitating because of the vicarious trauma responses that the human brain has to some of the things that investigators see. And so it's wanting to be involved without wanting any of the consequences of being involved.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was doing my research for my books, even though they're fiction, I wanted them to be as truthful as I could. And some of the research I did, kept me up at night.
Sure.
And it was like just discovering what was going on out there and trying to interpret it. And it was hard on me. There was times I just had to take, time off from writing. It was just like, I don't know if I can do this. It
Yes.
was just sad. And, I had all kinds of emotions, sadness, anger. How can people do this to other human beings?
Mm-hmm.
And one story I did on my podcast, actually the first one, was where this father, he didn't molest his son. He allowed others to do it.
Yeah.
And that was like, how can you do that to someone you're supposed to love?
It's just demonic. My little sister's a psychologist, and she gave me some good advice once. She said, Nick, don't try to understand crazy. And I think ultimately, I used to try to, like, get in the head of, like, okay, why would these traffickers do what they're doing? These uh, child exploiters, these predators do what they're doing. And I don't even try anymore. I mean, it's just you can't, right? It's like trying to get in the head of somebody who's willing to strap a bomb onto their chest and walk into a mosque and blow it up, or walk into a market and blow it up. Trying to, for the sole part, they're killing themselves for the purpose of trying to inflict as much damage as possible on innocent bystanders. And, like, you can't understand that unless you're mentally ill. I know there's plenty of PhDs out there they're trying to, and they're like, God bless them for trying, but I just don't think you can truly understand unless your brain is broken and your soul is broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the things I saw and research, I just could not comprehend. It was just beyond my brain to comprehend how someone could do that to another person or do that to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It was just beyond me. And but you said that the United States is one of the top countries in the world for human trafficking. I mean, that's not a
We are the
bad.
we are
Yeah,
the top. Yeah, we're not one of. We are number one. We are the
that's nothing to
largest
be proud
trafficking
of.
market in the world, right?
Why do you think that is?
Because where the money is. It's that simple, right? Where do you have a drug problem? Is it in the poor neighborhood? Those are the kids dealing the drugs.
Mm,
Where's the drug addiction problem? It's in the rich neighborhoods, because those are the kids who can afford the drugs, right? And uh, that's the reason why. because we have more internet connectivity on a per capita basis than, really definitely than any country that's anywhere near our size. We have a degradation of values where, our country is starting to say that, oh, well, look at what's wrong if a young woman wants to, do pornography while she's in college on OnlyFans. What's wrong with it if men are watching pornography? Like the whole sexualization and it's not that really the sexualization, it's the commodification of women and girls is being just widely accepted as normal.
Mhm.
And the linearly predictable outcome to that is that you're going to get more of it. And and then that ultimately will devolve into, well, now instead of just watching pornography, I'm going to go to the strip club. And instead of just watching these girls, now I'm going to hire them as prostitutes. And now I'm going to start hiring what I think are prostitutes on the web, which are actually, our research shows over 80% of them are trafficking adjacent, right? So they're victims of the trafficking market. And then it gets into, well, now I'm going to start doing things that are a little bit darker, and they just by the time they get caught by law enforcement, they've been doing it so long that it's just completely normalized.
Yeah. Well, what should the average citizen do if they suspect something?
If you suspect trafficking, low probability you will see it because most of it happens behind closed doors. And so the people who see it are the customers. But if you have somebody who suspects trafficking, right? So one of two things. One, if you suspect somebody else is trafficking, you see something in a parking lot, let's say, of a hotel, and then you call law enforcement. That's what we always have people say. Oh, should we call you at DeliverFund? No, you call law enforcement. Like, they're the ones who can actually do something about it. So you call law enforcement. If they need our help, they'll reach out, or they're already in our systems. The second thing would be if you think your child is being groomed by a trafficker, the number one thing you should do is preserve everything, screenshot everything, block that person, right? Don't allow your children to be on those platforms in the first place, and report all of it to law enforcement, because you don't know if law enforcement might already have an active case against that individual and they just need more information, or that individual may not even be on their radar. So if anybody suspects anything trafficking related, the very first thing they should do is get their local law enforcement involved. And if your city police say, like, they won't give you the um, a response that you feel is adequate, get your county sheriff involved, call the FBI, call Homeland Security. Like, just be the squeaky wheel, right? Start activating everybody you can get a hold of until you get somebody to respond.
Yeah. Going back to a comment you made about the youngest person that you've aware of, a 1 year old. Most people think of sexual trafficking as maybe a teenager or older.
Mm-hmm.
How does a 1 year old fit into sexual trafficking?
So that was a child that was familial trafficking. That was a child that was being um, sold to some very sick predators for their personal use in order to cover a drug debt.
Wow. So some parents sold their child.
Which is very common. It's called familial trafficking. There was a report that came out of Kentucky, and whether or not it's completely accurate is still up for debate. But regardless, it showed that over 40% of the trafficking that they were aware of in the state of Kentucky was actually family based, which is where you had parents or an uncle or a grandparent, right? Somebody that the parent who was a caregiver for the child was actually the trafficker. And that is extremely difficult to detect.
I noticed that I sort of thought, go, talking about something a little bit lighter. Uh, when I first contacted your people, and they sent me some information on you, and they had mentioned that you'd been dubbed the real Jack Ryan.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I was at the time I was actually reading a Tom Clancy
Okay.
book, yeah, about with the character Jack Ryan, and I thought,
Right.
okay, I've got to ask him about this. Why did you? Why do they deem you the real Jack Ryan?
So that's actually old now. That came from when Vice Media or when Amazon kind of restarted the Jack Ryan series.
Mm-hmm.
And Amazon hired Amazon or Vice Media, which I think has gone under since, but they hired Vice Media to go out and find the real Jack Ryan. And so, okay, who was Jack Ryan? It was somebody who was kind of an economics nerd. I checked that box.
Mm-hmm.
Who went to an Ivy League institution. I checked that box. Who was in the military. Now, Jack Ryan, I believe, was a Marine, conventional Marine, and I was a Air Force PJ, but okay, check that box, military.
Mm-hmm.
Who was who then went into an intelligence agency. Now, Jack Ryan was an analyst. I was operational, but intelligence agency, check that box, right? And then what do you always see in the Jack Ryan type films? Jack Ryan is in good shape. He can fight. He can shoot. Right, he can do all the action guy stuff. Well, the reality is the major majority of people at the CIA are professional typists. And I say that with love, but most of them, there's only 2 units that I'm aware of at the Central Intelligence Agency where you have to take a physical fitness evaluation as an example, right? Mine's one of them. Most people at the CIA, there's escalators in the building because most of them, quite frankly, would have a hard time walking up actual stairs. Right? Lots of brains, not a lot of brawn.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was difficult for Vice Media to find somebody who kind of fit the physical mold, the academic mold, right? Me as a Harvard grad, and then also fit the kind of CIA, who was also a CIA employee. And so that's how it happened. And yeah, that's kind of the long version of that story.
Well, I'll have a different outlet when I'm reading his books. I
Yeah.
guess I'll picture you now whenever.
Well, most people think that, Jason Bourne is real, or Jack Ryan, or James Bond, or, pick one. And the reality is that every single one of those individuals represent many different individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's nobody who can, learn, 15 languages and, can fight, in combatives at a world-class level and shoot at a world-class level, and also has, strength and endurance at a world-class level, and can jump out of an airplane at 30,000 feet, and can climb mountains, and can, scuba dive. And that is just that's not real. That's many, many different people, all wrapped into, who also has a world-class analytical mind, right? That's many people wrapped into one.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think obviously for storytelling purposes, makes for a much more entertaining story if you have one individual who's this superhero who can do all kinds of, incredible things. But the reality is that just doesn't exist in the real world.
Yeah, that's one thing I addressed in my book series, that I did not want them to be the former Navy SEAL or super secret agent or anything like that. They're just the average person who got tired of the trafficking, and each
Mm-hmm.
one of them, they have their weaknesses. But as a team, there's like 7 or 8 different members of this group, and each one of them has their own strengths. And together, as a team, yeah, they're like a super group, but individually, I mean, they're just like, I don't want to say you and me, but like me,
Hmm.
just the average person out there that has their faults and has their flaws, that trip over their own feet, but they have their partner there that is a little bit eh, more balanced, and they can, pick up where the other one drops off. So, each one of my characters, none of them have any super abilities. They all just average. And that's what I wanted with my story, is to appeal to the average person, where they can maybe, hey, that's me.
Hmm.
Whereas, all these, like the Jack Ryans and all like this and all these other uh, James Bonds, I can't relate to them. I mean, I
Sure.
enjoy
It's
reading about
entertaining, but it's
yeah,
just
it's
that entertainment.
entertaining and say, wow, man. I mean, he just, he scuba dived out of a submarine and caught this cable, and it took him up in the air, and now he's flying this helicopter, and
Yeah.
now he's
Yeah.
going to dive out of the helicopter and land on this moving boat and fight, these 15 people on this boat.
Right.
And and then at the end, he'll just pull out a cigarette or cigar, and it's just be another day at the office.
Right.
And, those people don't exist.
Right. Right. They
And
don't exist. And even folks like me, I get a lot of credit, because I look good on paper, but that's just because I don't put the failures on my resume. I mean, it tends to be the better you do from an operational perspective, or the better you are at that stuff, the worse you are at, from a personal perspective. And so there's always trade-offs, and we tend to glorify things that people can do and we forget that they're just people too. They might have a different skill set, they might have a different talent set. One of the things I think that has really driven me has just been a constant mission focus. I've never really been interested in making a lot of money. I've never really been interested in um any kind of fame or anything like that. I just wanted to do the work. There were people who need help, and they're in bad situations, and I just wanted to be part of the mechanism that got them out of that bad situations. And while other friends were skiing in high school, I volunteered to be a ski patroller, and then go straight in the military to go into pararescue. But I didn't really know anything or really care about pararescue, if you will, as a career field. I didn't really care about the patch. I wanted to do
mhm,
the work. And then when I decided to move over to the CIA, it was the same way. I didn't really care about, the CIA per se, right? A lot of people were really, guys like really loved that. Like, oh, I work for the CIA. It's like, oh, I want to go do the work.
mhm,
And it's the same thing on the trafficking side. I wasn't, and to my own detriment often, but really I'm terrible at the marketing piece. I know I don't leverage my background enough to get the word out from a branding perspective, but that's just because I want to focus on getting the work done. And in this day and age, though, you have to, you kind of people can't fund work they don't know exists. So I've had to learn to do the other pieces, even though, quite frankly, I don't really like it.
What would you like to leave a thought with us? I mean, what advice would you give to?
I think for anybody who's listening, obviously, if they made it this long, they're very interested in the trafficking issue. And I would say just find a place that you can plug in, but be very honest with yourself about where you're plugging in. Um, that doesn't mean, being like, oh, well, David started a podcast, so I'm going to go start a podcast. Well, we don't need multiple podcasts talking about the trafficking issue. Or Nick started DeliverFund, so I'm going to go start an organization like DeliverFund. We don't need multiple organizations like that, right? Maybe you're a marketing specialist and you're like, you know what? I'm going to make sure that David's podcast just blows up and everybody listens to it.
Mhm,
Maybe you are a finance person and you're like, oh, you know what? Nick's got to raise a few $1 million a year to keep these computers going and to keep this platform going. So, I'm going to jump in there and see if I can help him with the financial side. Maybe you're a psychologist, and you're going to reach out to a victim restoration home and start helping them with their psychological programs for being able to restore victims of trafficking. Whatever it is, find a place to plug in. And it doesn't have to be a full-time job. It can literally just be, well, I have a specific set of expertise that I've honed over a period of years. And so I'm going to make that available. Or at worst case, I'm going to use the information I've learned to protect my kids, which starts by taking away their iPads and getting them off the internet.
Exactly. All right, Nick, I appreciate it. And I appreciate everything you've done and will be doing. And thank you for your service in the past. And thank you for your current service. I know you're making a difference.
Well, thank you,
And
David. I appreciate you starting this podcast and having me on.
thank you. And good luck and be safe.
All right, you too. Bye now.
Bye. That's it for our show for today. Thank you for joining in. I hope you were able to learn something today that may help you understand what is going on around you, allowing you to be aware of the dangers to yourself and perhaps a loved one, and maybe inspire you to get involved in the fight to stop human trafficking. Please follow me on Facebook, subscribe to my podcast, contact me at davidjstory.com with your questions or comments. Music by tunereel.com. And please remember, always watch your six and others too.